So you should have heard that. Tonight, what I wanted to do is I just wanted to give you a wrapper or a frame or some things to look out for as you go through the book of Ruth here. So we're going to look at cultural, we're going to look at theological, we're going to look at biblical, we're going to look at themes of Ruth. We've got some just random interesting things, or at least I think they're interesting. But if you have any questions, let me know, and we'll do my best to answer them. I am by no means a Ruth scholar, but I certainly can do some research when I need to. So what I wanted to do was, whoops, get onto the right screen. I got too many screens. Was kind of talk about the book itself for a second. Ruth, as far as we know, was written in the 4th, 5th, 6th century BCE, and the author is unknown. Nobody knows for sure who wrote it. It's attributed to Samuel, but Samuel would have lived like 500 years earlier. So did he write it? Maybe, and we just don't have any copies before then. But truthfully, we don't know who wrote it. And the reason we can date it to the 4th, 5th, 6th century in there is language that they use. Just like if you were to read Shakespeare, you can kind of get a sense real quick of the time frame that Bill was writing compared to if he was writing today, right? The words that he chooses and the sentence structure that he uses and whether. So that's how scholars can kind of get this to, let's say, the 5th century or so. Okay. So where did it come from? I don't know. In our Bible, in the Protestant Bible, Ruth is placed chronologically. Okay, so we go Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Number, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and then 1st and 2nd Samuel, we start the story of David. So it is all done by time in our Bible. If you don't know, Ruth is the great-grandmother of David. Yeah, great-grandmother of David. I wasn't sure how many generations there were, but great-grandmother of David. So that's why it sits for us just before 1st Samuel in our Bible. But if you went to a Jewish Bible, a Jewish Tanakh, they order their books completely different. And they separate them into 3 big sections. The Torah, which you've probably heard before, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Number, Deuteronomy. That's the beginning. That's the first set of scrolls, the most holy scrolls for a Jew. The next section is the Nevi'im, which are the prophets. So Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all the small prophets that we have, Joel and Jonah and Micah, all go into that section. And the last one is the Ketuvim. And I may be saying these completely wrong, but I'm going to say them with confidence because I don't know that anybody else speaks Hebrew, and I certainly don't. But I may be saying these horribly wrong, and I apologize if I am. But the last section of their Bible is all a collection of writings. So that's where you find Psalms and Proverbs. And Ruth is one of those writings that falls in there. They don't consider her a prophet. They consider it a story as part of the other narrative of the biblical witness. But where us Protestant, we're really concerned about getting it in the right time sequence. It's not as important for our Jewish brothers and sisters. I don't know if you can see, but some of those are starred next to them. There are 5 books that are starred: Song of Songs or Song of Solomon, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, and Esther. And those 5 books make up the Meglioth. And those are the books that are always read at special Jewish festivals. So Ruth is read every single year during the Feast of Weeks. It is one of the holy books that is sacred to our Jewish brothers and sisters. And to go real quick through the others, the Song of Songs is read every Passover, and Ecclesiastes is read every festival of the booths. The story of Esther is always read during Purim, which is if you remember the story of Esther, it was the plot to get rid of the Jews. So they read that to kind of remember that story. In Lamentations, they read during a festival to remember the destruction of the temple, both times that the temple was destroyed. So Ruth is read every single year during that festival. And that festival, its special name is called the Shavat. It is the festival of weeks, and it's the celebration of the harvest. When you're reading Ruth, you'll see that it happens during the harvest, and so that's how it kind of got associated with it. And it in the Bible tells exactly when it's supposed to happen. It happens 50 days after Passover. So this year, if you want to know when the Feast of Weeks is, it's May 29th. And it's spelled out. The festival is spelled out in the Bible in Exodus 34:22. There it says, celebrate the festival of the weeks. I won't keep on going. And another fun trivia thing for you, Passover, Shavat, and Sukkot are all specified and must be celebrated by the community every year. And so if you go to Leviticus 23, they are very specifically laid out what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to prepare, how long you celebrate, what does it mean to celebrate. Very, very specific. And so Ruth has become part of that tradition for our Jewish brothers and sisters. So the story of Ruth, just super, super over 20,000 foot view. There's a man named Elimelech and a woman Naomi, and they have two sons, and they have to flee to Moab because there's a famine happening in Bethlehem. And when they get there, the two sons marry Moabite women, Ruth and Oprah, and then all three of the men die. Oprah stays put. She marries another guy, and Ruth and Naomi go back to Bethlehem, and that's where they meet Boaz, and the story continues for them. The reason this is so important, and the reason that it's a big deal that Ruth goes back with Naomi and that they don't have men in their lives, is husbands were the security for women in biblical times. Women could not own property. Women could not have money. They couldn't have jobs. They 100% relied on family to take care of them. And so when you had these three widows, all of a sudden with no men to take care of them, there was a real serious life-threatening space for them. Will they survive without having a man in their life? And so as you're reading and as you're going through Ruth, really think about how important the roles of family and land matter to our Jewish ancestors like that. If you remember the story of Abraham, when he gets called to God, he has to leave his family and leave his land to go out to a new spot. That's what makes Abraham's faith in God such a big deal, is because those bedrock things that everybody can rely on and know about and be a part of, he gave up to do. And what makes this special is Ruth didn't have to do that, right? She was not family with Naomi. They were family by marriage, and when the marriage, her husband died, she wasn't family anymore. So that the Ruth went and wanted to take care of Naomi and stood by Naomi is a really big deal. She is trying to make sure that Naomi's taken care of, and that should have been Naomi's family's responsibility. So that as you're reading that, keep that in mind as well, that was a big choice for Ruth to do. So I grabbed a map. I don't know if you can see it specifically, but I wanted to show the relation between Bethlehem and Moab. It is roughly 80 miles from spot to spot, which would have been like a 4 or 5 day journey on foot, maybe more, over mountains and desert, and certainly with brigands and other ne'er-do-wells on the road as well. It was not a safe journey for anyone to take, let alone two widows to go back to Bethlehem. They would have been probably better off staying in Moab to for their own safety and security. But as the story goes, and the twist in the story, does somebody have a question or okay? The twist in the story is that the Moabites were not very well thought of by our Israelite forebears there. So this comes from Deuteronomy 23, 3 through 6. I just highlighted the importance there. So considering Moabites, you shall never promote their welfare or their prosperity as long as you live. Ruth was a Moabite, right? She did not come from Bethlehem and go back to Moab. She went from Moab to Bethlehem. So that's another interesting twist in the story is that you've got somebody that is, I don't want to say the villain of the story, but certainly not a hero of the story that is doing a loving kindness that she didn't have to do. It's kind of like in Jonah, when Jonah goes to Nineveh, which was the most hated city of all the cities at the time, and they actually repent and they listen to God. And wait a minute, Ninevites aren't supposed to do that. They're supposed to be these horrible people, but they're listening and following to God. It's that same kind of twist to the story that wait a minute, something else is going on here, something bigger. So um, the fact that Ruth is a Moabite um, plays large in the whole biblical story that I'll come back to later, but really be thinking about that. That again, it would have been safer for her to stay home, not follow Naomi. She was going to a place where nobody liked her, and particularly they did not want her to thrive at all. And but she still stuck by Naomi as well. Okay. So why do the Jews read Ruth on Shabbat? Um, there's a couple reasons that I could come up with, and then there's some other ones that are kind of in the Talmud. They're commentary, and I will let you decide if those are ones that a particular scholar decided, or if that's something that the body itself believes. I don't know, but it is certainly written in the commentary for the Bible that the Jews have. So first, the big one is that the story of Ruth happens during harvest time, and so it just logically makes sense that that's the scripture that you would read during that festival when you're celebrating the harvest. The second is the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. Jews believe represent God's loving kindness for his people, right? When the people screw up, God's still there for them. When the people get surly and snarky, God's still there for them. When the people cry out, God rescues them. When people are in trouble, God's there for them. It's the Jewish word or the Hebrew word is hesed, means loving kindness. And so that's the theme of the sacred scripture for Jews, and it's also the theme of Ruth. Is that she did something she did not have to do. And I'll talk about Hesed a little bit more. The next three are where I think it gets a little more suspicious, but maybe. The Talmud says that King David was born and died on this particular festival. And since she was his great grandmother, that's why they read it. Maybe. I don't know if there are any records that have David's exact date of birth and death, but maybe. I've said before how important numbers are to especially to the ancient Jews, and the gematria of Ruth. If you took all of her letters, her symbols, and you added them up and did whatever math they were supposed to do, is 606, which by coincidence is also the number of commandments given at Mount Sinai. Okay, so another possibility might be a little bit of gymnastics there to make that work. And the true Orthodox belief is that the festival is the day that the Torah was given. So it celebrates and reminds Jews that that's the day they were brought into the Torah, into the law, into that Hesed of God, just like Ruth was brought into Judaism and became a part of that community as well. So is that why it's there? I don't know. That certainly makes it interesting to think about, doesn't it? So what about a Christian? Why should Christians read Ruth? And these are some of the themes that I think you'll see in there as you're reading. And I hope that they encourage you and give you much to study and to discuss and study. The first is that God is faithful, right? So throughout this, there's a sense of protection. There's a sense of cosmic ordering that makes sure that Ruth and Naomi are taken care of, even when, by all accounts, they should have been destitute and died without having their husbands there. So the story of Ruth is a reminder of God's faithfulness in our lives. It serves as a practical reminder of the acts of Hesed, loving kindness, and how that makes a difference in the world, right? Ruth's act to Naomi, Boaz's act to Ruth. There's all this, and God overseeing it all. There's this act of love and kindness that keeps happening in them. And that God works through people. I'm going to challenge you because I don't remember, but God's not mentioned much in Ruth. He is mentioned, but not much, I don't think. And so it's more about the actions of the people along the way, but it's a reminder that God works through people to bring his love and kindness and care for creation. So God works through Ruth to take care of Naomi. God works Boaz to take care of everybody. And God also works through acts like farming, right? Through farming and the gleaning and giving space there, Ruth is cared for and Naomi are cared for. So God works both through people and through the work that people do in there as well. And the last one for why Christians should read Ruth is it's a reminder that God's blessings continue on through humanity, right? God blessed Ruth in this story. There's no other way around that. And because God blessed Ruth, David came later on. And then after David, Jesus came later on. Jesus is in the direct lineage of Ruth as well. So when we think about the way God blesses us, I don't always think we're thinking about how that ripples out and goes beyond us as well in our lives. So really be thinking about as you're reading this, how God is setting the stage for Jesus to come onto the earth and David to rule and be the king that he was. And it all starts with this humble story from Ruth. I've mentioned Hesed a few times. This is a word and a theme that's in Ruth. It's a theme in the Torah. It's a theme in the Bible altogether. It translates to loving kindness, but even that's not quite a good translation. Steadfast love, covenant love, all of those would be appropriate translations as well. But it's that idea of us being faithful to God and God being faithful to us, to God to care for people through other people, to God care for the vulnerable, to God to care for the actors in the story. So the Hesed, that loving covenant, loyal kindness and goodness really is part of Ruth and part of, I think, the whole Bible as well. Okay. How are we doing?
We're doing great.
Okay. All
We're
right.
still here.
Okay. So now I've just got some other miscellaneous things to kind of throw at you that, like I said, I think are interesting. But you can tell me later if you know they're interesting or not. Again, as you're reading this, Ruth is not Jewish. She is a Moabite woman. And that is a big deal. When you've got a community that really prided itself and still does on their genetic makeup and their family unit, you've got an outsider that's leading the story here to show God's goodness and to show what it means to be loving and kind. Ruth is not Jewish. Like I said earlier, Ruth is the great grandmother of King David. So at the very end, it'll say she was the mother of Obed, the grandmother of Jesse, who is David's father. And so she stands in that lineage along the way. And
Can I ask you a question, Pastor
you betcha.
Scott?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so Ruth and Orpah are Moabite women,
Yes.
but so wouldn't that have been like against their law? You know, Naomi and whatever his name is, Melanonoc, to have their sons marry somebody outside of their beliefs?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. To have them even go into Moab in the first place would have been frowned upon by a good kosher Jew or a good Orthodox Jew, because those aren't the people of the faith. That's not a kosher space. It's not a clean space. It's not a space that was given us by God. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And still, God uses that person that we think of as an outsider, or they would think of as an outsider, to do God's work. So that's absolutely. And Boaz, I've got this in my notes and I don't remember where I got it, but Boaz, I have as the son of Rahab. And if you remember who Rahab was, she was the prostitute from the Battle of Jericho that turned the city over when they came with Joshua and kind of gave them some insight so they could blow the horns and knock the walls down. But yeah, so you've got, so think about that. You've got the pinnacle, the apex king of all kings ever for a Jew, King David, and his great grandmother was a Moab, was not a Jew, and his great grandfather was were the folks at Jericho, were they Canaanites or Philistines? I remember which. They weren't Jews when they came through, and was a prostitute as well. So from very humble beginnings, from space that shouldn't have happened, we get King David. And that same type of thing happens, though, all the way through the biblical story, right? Jacob was the youngest child, should not have gotten the inheritance. David shouldn't have been anybody special because he was the youngest of the family as well. There's all these stories of the underdog, or the one you wouldn't expect, or the underdog that is the one that God loves to use to bring his glory about. Ruth,
Was
the Moabite.
Rahab the one that what did she ask? Pam asked before she went out. The one that hid the travelers
Or help them escape.
or helped them escape.
Yes, that was Rahab.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay,
Just
yeah,
help us
the
here.
prostitute in Jericho. They went in to scout, and she's the one that got him out. The basket over the side of the wall.
Okay.
Yeah, so they were kind of scouting. Yep, that was Rahab.
Okay. She
And
had to step out for the little one.
yep.
So
And another really interesting thing is Ruth is mentioned in the lineage of Jesus in the book of Matthew. So the beginning of Matthew, it traces Abraham to Jesus, all of his ancestors along the way, and Ruth is listed as one of those. You don't do that. You list the men. But there are 5 women in Matthew's lineage that he picks up, and Ruth is one of them. So that's kind of cool too. Again, kind of flipping things around. Naomi, her Jewish name means pleasant, but she will change her name right at the beginning and to Mara, and that means bitter. So she was pleasant before when life was well, And then after her husband died and she has to go back, her name is Bitter, or she call me Bitter instead. So when you see Mara, that means bitter. Okay. And so if you take nothing else from everything that I said to you, this is the heart verse of the whole book. This is the single verse that if you pulled out, you could make sense of the whole book, or know the whole story without. So this is Ruth 1:16. And in case you can't read it, I don't know how big screens are. It says, where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Right? What a bold statement from Ruth to graft it into that Jewish family and become part of that, and through that, Jesus. So, any questions or other questions?
Rahab was the one that helped.
Rahab was the one that helped it, that kept the men in the house and hid them. Okay.
Yes.
And
Yep.
helped them escape.
And then later lowered him down in the basket off the
Mhm.
side of them.
Okay.
Yep.
She was in something we did, Good Girls of the Bible or something like that. One of
Probably.
those studies.
Bad girls. of
Bad
the Bible.
Girls of the Bible.
Probably.
Yeah,
She was the
Yeah.
bad girl of the Bible.
bad girl that God used. Yeah.
Yep. She's got a little darker side to her, doesn't she? So blessings on your study. Enjoy. This is one of the gems of the Bible. And it's simple, but at the same time, it speaks so many levels of beautiful love and care and family and community and identity and all those themes as well. So
I find it interesting that we decided to do this book at this time, considering it's read every year for
Yeah.
the festival of
It's kind of coinciding with the time.
yeah, the
You're
time frame. Yes.
going to be really close to that when the festival is.
Yeah, so I think that's very interesting.
God works like that. All right, you all. Well, I'll let you take back over. I'm gonna stop recording.
Thank you, Pastor.